HOA Karen's husband hauled away my $45,000 tractor, convinced their association controlled my land. Then I opened my badge wallet, and his confidence vanished before the real investigation even began. Welcome back, everyone. Before today's story begins, I want to thank each and every one of you for being here. If this is your first time on the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you'll always know when a new story is released. Your support means more than you know. Every like, comment, and subscription helps this channel grow and allows us to keep sharing incredible stories with viewers around the world. And before we begin, tell me this, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. Now, grab a comfortable seat, relax, and let's dive into today's unforgettable story. If you touch that tractor, you're going to turn an HOA argument into something you can't undo. Douglas Halstead looked straight at me and laughed. It was 6:18 on a cold Tuesday morning, and my $45,000 tractor was already halfway onto a flatbed equipment trailer. The diesel engine rattled through the gravel beneath my boots. Hydraulic lines hissed. A steel chain dragged across the trailer deck with a sound sharp enough to wake half the county. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and until that morning, Douglas thought I was just the stubborn guy living beside Cedar Glen Estates. I stood at the edge of my driveway in jeans, work boots, and a faded brown jacket, watching him direct the tow operator like he owned the place. Behind him, Rebecca Halstead sat inside her silver SUV. Rebecca was president of the Cedar Glen Estates HOA. Douglas was her husband. Neither of them owned 1 inch of my 11 acres. Shut it down, I said. The tow operator glanced toward Douglas. Douglas raised one hand. Keep loading. I pulled out my phone. That made him smile. You recording me now? Yes. Good. Make sure you get the whole thing. I did. Trailer license plate. Company logo. Douglas's face. Rebecca's SUV. The tractor's rear tire crossing the survey line. Timestamp. 6:19 a.m. Douglas walked toward me holding a white sheet of paper. Across the top was the Cedar Glen Estates logo. Equipment abatement authorization. You've ignored multiple compliance notices, he said. I kept recording. Compliance with what? Unauthorized commercial equipment visible from the community. This is agricultural equipment. Same difference. No, it isn't. He pointed toward my barn. Rebecca gave you plenty of opportunities. I looked past him at the orange survey stake beside the gravel. My property line. My tractor had been parked nearly 60 feet inside it. You know this parcel isn't part of Cedar Glen. Douglas's jaw tightened. Your property affects Cedar Glen. That's not what I said. Rebecca finally stepped out of the SUV. Cream coat. Leather gloves. Clipboard tucked against her chest. Ethan, don't make this dramatic. I almost smiled. There was a $45,000 machine being hauled off my land before sunrise, and apparently I was the dramatic one. Who authorized the removal? The association, Rebecca said. Who specifically? She looked at Douglas. That was useful. I moved the camera slightly. Douglas noticed. His expression changed. Put the phone down. No. The tow operator paused near the cab. Sir, you sure this is authorized? Douglas held up the paper. I'm acting for the association. Finish the load. I could have stepped in front of the trailer. I could have grabbed the tractor key. I could have turned a bad decision into a dangerous confrontation around several tons of machinery. Instead, I backed away. Douglas mistook that for surrender. Finally, he said. The chains tightened. The tractor rolled forward. At 6:26, the trailer pulled onto the county road. Rebecca followed in her SUV. Douglas gave me one last satisfied look through the passenger window. Then they disappeared around the bend. I lowered my phone, checked the recording, saved it twice. Then I made a call. I'd like to report stolen agricultural equipment. The dispatcher asked the estimated value. $45,000. Do you know who took it? I looked at the empty space beside my barn. Yes, ma'am. I do. Douglas thought he'd just enforced an HOA rule. What he didn't know was that I had spent 16 years investigating property crimes. And before the morning was over, he was going to learn exactly what that badge in my wallet meant. 3 months before Douglas hauled away my tractor, Rebecca Halstead stood at my fence and tried to redraw a property line with her voice. It was late September, warm enough for cicadas, and I was greasing the loader joints when her silver SUV rolled slowly down my gravel drive. She stopped beside the barn. That bothered me immediately. Visitors normally parked near the house. Rebecca parked where she could see the tractor. She stepped out wearing white slacks, a pale blue blouse, and sunglasses. Ethan Caldwell. That's me. I'm Rebecca Halstead, president of Cedar Glen Estates. I wiped my hands on a shop rag. I know who you are. Her smile tightened. Then you've probably seen our notices. I've received 3. And ignored them. No. I answered them. I pointed toward the cedar fence beyond my pasture. Cedar Glen's manicured lawns began on the other side. My response included the deed and county parcel map. Rebecca opened a leather folder. Your tractor is visible from Willowcrest Court. So, heavy commercial equipment violates community standards. It's a farm tractor. Residents have complained. Residents can see my barn too. Want me to move that? Her sunglasses came off. I'd appreciate it if you took this seriously. I do. I walked to the fence corner where an orange survey stake stood several inches above the grass. Your HOA ends there. Then I pointed toward my barn. My property begins here. Rebecca followed my hand, but didn't look impressed. Your land directly affects our community. That doesn't put it inside your association. We maintain standards here. You maintain standards over there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Wind moved through the dry grass between us. My family had owned those 11 acres long before Cedar Glen existed. My grandfather built the barn. My father replaced the western fence. I had the deed, survey, tax records, and title history. There was no ambiguity. Rebecca closed her folder. We're asking you to cooperate voluntarily. And if I don't, then we'll consider other remedies. That phrase stayed with me. Other remedies. What remedies do you have against property outside your jurisdiction? She smiled again. We'll see. A week later, Douglas appeared. He didn't introduce himself. I found him standing near the roadside fence photographing my tractor with his phone. Can I help you? He turned. I'm Douglas Halstead, Rebecca's husband, property operations coordinator. I had never seen that title in any Cedar Glen document. What are you coordinating? He ignored the question and looked toward the tractor. That's expensive equipment. Expensive enough. Commercial? Agricultural. He walked toward the orange survey stake. HOA maintenance comes through here. No, it doesn't. Douglas looked down. You sure about that line? Very. He smiled. We'll get it sorted out. The following Monday, I came home and found the orange stake lying in the ditch. 20 feet inside my property, Cedar Glen's landscaping crew had cut a clean strip through my grass. I stopped them. Then I called the surveyor who had marked the boundary. He returned 2 days later and confirmed exactly what I already knew. Cedar Glen hadn't gained 20 feet. Someone had simply moved the marker. I installed 2 security cameras that afternoon. One faced the driveway. The other covered the barn and property line. For 6 nights, nothing happened. On the 7th, at 11:43 p.m., motion detection triggered. I watched the footage the next morning. Douglas stepped through the fence opening carrying a flashlight. He walked directly to my tractor. Not the barn. Not the survey stake. The tractor. Then he crouched beside the frame and photographed the serial plate. I replayed the clip twice. Saved the original. Made a backup. Douglas hadn't crossed onto my property because he was confused about the boundary. He knew exactly where it was. And he wasn't photographing my tractor because he admired it. He was preparing to take it. The first time Rebecca threatened to remove my tractor, she did it in a room full of people and smiled while she said it. Cedar Glen's monthly board meeting was held in a clubhouse that smelled like lemon cleaner and burnt coffee. I attended because another violation notice had arrived that morning. This one demanded that I relocate the tractor within 10 days. I sat in the back. Rebecca ran the meeting from behind a polished oak table while Douglas stood near the wall with his arms folded. Near the end, Rebecca opened a red folder. Next item, equipment visibility and community appearance. My name wasn't mentioned. It didn't need to be. She explained that Cedar Glen would begin abatement measures against non-compliant equipment affecting neighborhood standards. A homeowner raised his hand. What does abatement mean? Removal, when necessary. From private lots? Rebecca barely paused. If necessary. I leaned forward. Even lots outside Cedar Glen? Every head turned. Rebecca's eyes found mine. We've already discussed your situation, Ethan. No. You sent demands. That's different. Douglas pushed away from the wall. This isn't the place. A board meeting discussing removal sounds exactly like the place. Rebecca closed the red folder. We have documentation supporting our position. Then send it to me. She smiled. You'll receive whatever you're entitled to. 2 days later, an envelope arrived. Inside was another violation notice and a photocopied map. Someone had drawn a thick yellow line around Cedar Glen. The line crossed my driveway and swallowed nearly half an acre of my land. It wasn't a county map. It wasn't a recorded plat. It wasn't even professionally surveyed. It was an HOA landscaping diagram. I placed it beside my deed. The actual boundary missed my driveway entirely. That afternoon, I photographed both documents together. Then I checked my cameras. Douglas had returned twice. Once at 4:12 p.m., again after midnight. The second visit lasted 9 minutes. He photographed the tractor from every side, including the serial plate, hitch, tires, and ignition area. Then he measured the driveway entrance. That wasn't enforcement. That was preparation. The following week, I saw a flatbed equipment truck driving slowly past my property. It belonged to Westbrook Towing and Storage. The driver never stopped. Douglas's pickup followed 30 seconds later. I wrote down both plates. On Friday, Rebecca sent a certified letter titled Final Notice of Equipment Abatement. It claimed the tractor could be removed at my expense if I failed to comply. There was no citation to any county ordinance, no court order, no recorded easement, only HOA language repeated until it sounded official. I called Rebecca. "You received the notice?" she asked. "I did." "Then you understand what's next." "I understand what you're claiming. Move the tractor, and this ends." "Rebecca, your association has no authority over my parcel." Her voice hardened. "Everyone says that until enforcement becomes expensive." I looked through the kitchen window toward the barn. The orange survey stake had been replaced and flagged with bright ribbon. "Is Douglas authorized to enter my land?" Silence. "Why are you asking?" "Because my cameras show him doing it." Another silence. Longer this time. "You've been filming us?" "I'm filming my property." She hung up. That evening, I copied the camera files onto an external drive. Then I photographed the tractor's serial number myself, along with the ignition, hour meter, tires, attachments, and every visible scratch. The next morning, I noticed something new beneath the windshield wiper of Douglas's pickup outside the clubhouse. A Westbrook Towing business card. That was when the pattern finally became clear. Rebecca wasn't trying to convince me anymore. Douglas wasn't checking boundaries. And the towing company hadn't driven past by accident. They were building paperwork around a decision they'd already made. The only thing they hadn't figured out was what would happen after they took it. The document Douglas used to take my tractor looked official enough to fool someone who didn't know where to look. I first learned it existed 6 days before the theft. A plain envelope appeared in my mailbox with no postage, which meant someone had delivered it by hand. Inside was a single page. Notice of intent to abate non-compliant equipment. Cedar Glen logo at the top. Case number. My address. Tractor description. Even the approximate model year. At the bottom, beneath Rebecca's printed name, was a line stating that authorized contractors could enter affected property to remove equipment after the compliance deadline. Affected property, not association property. That wording mattered. I photographed the envelope, scanned the notice, and placed the original in a file. Then I pulled out my deed and survey again. Nothing had changed. My 11 acres remained outside Cedar Glen. No easement granted the HOA access. No covenant gave Rebecca authority over my tractor. No agreement allowed Douglas onto my land. Yet someone had written a document designed to make all of that look uncertain. The next afternoon, I drove past the clubhouse. Douglas's pickup was parked beside a Westbrook towing truck. The two men stood near the rear bumper talking. I kept driving. At home, I checked the cameras. At 5:36 p.m., Douglas's truck passed my driveway. At 5:41, Westbrook followed. Neither entered. They were looking, measuring, planning. That evening, I moved the tractor deeper beside the barn, not because Rebecca had ordered me to, but because I wanted there to be absolutely no argument that it sat near a public road. 60 feet became nearly 100. The orange survey stake remained clearly visible at the edge of the property. 2 mornings later, I found fresh boot prints in the damp soil beside it. They crossed from Cedar Glen's landscaped strip onto my land. My camera supplied the rest. Douglas had arrived shortly after midnight. He stood beside the stake, shined a flashlight directly onto the orange marker, then stepped past it. There was no confusion. He knew exactly when he crossed the line. He walked to the barn, inspected the tractor, and returned to his truck. I saved that footage in 3 places. The following evening, Rebecca called. This is your final opportunity to resolve this voluntarily. By doing what? Removing the tractor from view. I moved it farther back. It's still visible. From where? A pause. Certain homes. Which homes? That's irrelevant. No, Rebecca. Jurisdiction is relevant. Her voice sharpened. You keep hiding behind technicalities. A property line isn't a technicality. Neither are community standards. Your community ends at the orange stake. She exhaled slowly. You may regret making this difficult. I looked toward the barn. Is that a threat? It's advice. The call ended. I wrote down the time and exactly what she'd said. Then I checked the tractor again. Serial number. Attachments. Hour meter. Existing scratches. Everything documented. I wasn't expecting anyone to actually steal a $45,000 machine. People usually stop before crossing from arrogance into something a police report can describe in one sentence. But Douglas had already crossed my boundary at night. Rebecca had already threatened removal. And Westbrook had already surveyed the driveway. By Monday, the deadline printed on their notice had expired. Nothing happened. Tuesday morning arrived cold and dark. At 6:18, diesel thundered outside my bedroom window. I opened my eyes. For 1 second, I listened. Then I recognized the engine. Mine. I reached the window and saw headlights beside the barn. A flatbed trailer waited in my driveway. Douglas stood next to my tractor. Rebecca's silver SUV idled behind him. And the paper they'd spent weeks making look legal was finally being used to take something that had never belonged to them. By 6:20 that Tuesday morning, Douglas had made the mistake I had spent 3 months hoping nobody would be foolish enough to make. He had crossed the surveyed boundary, entered my property, started my tractor, and ordered a private towing company to remove it. I stood near the barn with my phone recording while the diesel engine shook the cold air. The tow operator climbed down from the tractor and approached Douglas. You own this property? Douglas held up the abatement authorization. I'm acting for Cedar Glen Estates. That's not what I asked. Rebecca stepped closer. The association authorized the removal. The operator looked toward me. Sir, you contesting this? Absolutely. His face tightened. Douglas pointed at the document. We've been through this. He's non-compliant. I kept the camera steady. Ask him whether my parcel belongs to Cedar Glen. Douglas turned toward me. Stop interfering. I'm standing on my land. Rebecca folded her arms. Ethan, you've had multiple warnings. And you've had my deed. The operator glanced between us. For a moment, I thought he might unload the tractor. Then Douglas tapped the authorization. Your office approved the work order. Finish it. That sentence went on to the recording too. The operator hesitated, climbed back aboard, and continued. Hydraulics whined. Steel ramps vibrated. My tractor crawled onto the trailer. I could have blocked the driveway with my pickup. I could have grabbed the controls. Instead, I stepped farther back. $45,000 mattered. Nobody getting crushed between a trailer and several tons of machinery mattered more. At 6:26, the chains tightened around the tractor. Douglas walked toward me. You can recover it after paying the removal fee, storage costs, and outstanding HOA penalties. Where are you taking it? Westbrook. Address. You'll receive instructions. I nodded. Good. That seemed to irritate him. You think this is funny? No. I aimed the camera toward the orange survey marker. I think it's documented. His eyes followed mine. For the first time that morning, his confidence flickered. Rebecca called his name. He turned away. The trailer rolled down my driveway and crossed onto the county road. I filmed until its taillights disappeared. Then I stopped recording. Saved the file, uploaded a backup, and called dispatch. I need to report stolen agricultural equipment. The dispatcher asked for my location, description of the tractor, serial number, and estimated value. I had every answer ready. Approximately $45,000. Do you know who removed it? Yes. Is this happening now? They left less than 2 minutes ago. Any weapons or threats? No. Are you safe? Yes. She told me deputies were being sent. Rebecca's SUV was still parked near the road. She had stayed behind. Maybe she wanted to watch my reaction. She walked toward me. Calling the police won't change the covenants. There are no covenants on this parcel. You keep saying that. Because land records keep agreeing with me. Her mouth hardened. This is a civil matter. Maybe. That answer surprised her. I didn't need to decide what offense had occurred. I was the victim. Someone else would investigate. A patrol cruiser appeared at the end of the road. Rebecca watched it approach. Then Douglas's pickup returned behind it. He stepped out before the deputy had fully parked. "This is ridiculous," Douglas said. "We have authorization." The deputy looked at me. "Mr. Caldwell?" "Yes." Douglas cut in. "Officer, this man has been obstructing lawful HOA enforcement for months." I reached slowly into my jacket. Douglas smirked. Then I opened the leather credential wallet. The badge caught the morning light. His smile disappeared. "I'm Detective Ethan Caldwell, County Sheriff's Office." Douglas stared at the badge, then at me. "You're a cop." "Detective. Property crimes." For the first time since I'd met him, Douglas had nothing to say. But the part he truly needed to worry about came next. I turned to the patrol deputy. "I'm the complainant. This isn't my investigation." Douglas kept staring at my badge as if the metal itself had changed what happened that morning. It hadn't. The deed was the same. The survey line was the same. The tractor had belonged to me before he knew my job, and it still belonged to me afterward. The patrol deputy, Marcus Reed, looked from my credentials to Douglas. "You two know each other professionally?" "No," I said. "I'm the property owner." Then I closed the badge wallet and put it away. "I want this handled like any other theft complaint." Rebecca stepped forward. "Theft? That's ridiculous." "We exercised association authority." Reed turned toward her. "Does his property belong to your HOA? It impacts our community." "That wasn't my question." Rebecca's mouth tightened. Douglas recovered enough to raise the abatement paper. "We have authorization." Reed took it. "From whom?" "The association." "Who owns the land?" Douglas glanced at Rebecca. Neither answered. I stayed quiet. That was intentional. I'd spent 16 years interviewing people who talked themselves into worse positions because silence made them uncomfortable. Reed examined the paper. "Where's the tractor now?" "Westbrook Towing," Douglas said. "Did Mr. Caldwell give permission for it to be removed?" "No, because he refused compliance." Reed wrote something down. A second cruiser arrived. Deputy Allison Price stepped out and began photographing the driveway, tire marks, survey stake, and barn. I handed Reed a flash drive. "Camera footage. Original files are preserved separately." He looked at me. "You already copied it?" "Yes." Douglas muttered something under his breath. Rebecca heard him. "Stop talking." That was probably the best advice she'd given all morning. Reed asked me for the tractor's serial number. I gave it from memory, then showed him the photographs I'd taken days earlier. Serial plate. Hour meter. Attachments. Existing scratches. Purchase paperwork. Insurance record. Everything tied the machine to me. At 7:14, Reed contacted Westbrook and instructed them not to release, move, dismantle, or alter the tractor while the ownership dispute and reported theft were being investigated. Douglas protested. "You can't interfere with an HOA enforcement action." Reed looked at him. "Sir, I'm preserving reported property while we establish who had legal authority to remove it." That ended the argument. Then I made my own position clear. "Marcus, because I'm the complainant, I don't want anyone from my unit handling the investigation." He nodded. "Already figured that." The case was transferred to Detective Laura Bennett from the neighboring district. By noon, she called me. Her first question wasn't about my badge. It was about the orange stake. "Your footage shows Halstead crossing it before the removal?" "More than once." "And he knew it marked the surveyed boundary?" "He stood over it with a flashlight." "Good. Not good for Douglas. Good evidence." Bennett spent the afternoon collecting documents from Westbrook, Cedar Glen, and the county recorder. The towing company produced the work order Douglas had submitted. It described my tractor as abandoned equipment located on property subject to Cedar Glen Enforcement Authority. That phrase did not match the deed. It did not match the plat. And it definitely did not match the footage showing Douglas studying the boundary before stepping across it. That evening, Bennett called again. "Westbrook says Douglas personally identified the tractor before the tow." I expected that. "There's something else." I waited. "The manager remembers him because he asked what would happen if the owner tried to recover the equipment without paying." "What did they tell him?" "That release required authorization from whoever ordered the tow." I looked through my window at the empty space beside the barn. Douglas hadn't simply wanted the tractor moved. He wanted control over whether I could get it back. The badge had frightened him. But the paperwork was beginning to tell a much worse story. The tractor wasn't the first piece of equipment Cedar Glen had taken. I learned that 48 hours after Detective Bennett started asking questions. She called just after dinner. Ethan, does the name Raymond Foster mean anything to you? No. He lives on Brookfield Court. Inside Cedar Glen? Yes. He wants to talk. Raymond arrived at my house the next morning driving an aging red pickup. He was 60-something, with rough hands and the careful expression of someone who had spent too long convincing himself an injustice wasn't worth fighting. He looked toward the empty barn. Westbrook took yours. Yes. He nodded slowly. They took my utility trailer last year. I stopped. Why? Rebecca said it violated parking rules. From your driveway? Side yard. Raymond had paid $1,840 in towing and storage fees to recover a trailer worth barely twice that. Who authorized it? Douglas. That afternoon, Bennett called again. Another resident had come forward. Then another. A lawn tractor. A contractor's generator. Landscaping equipment. A boat trailer. Different violations. Same towing company. Same pattern. Cedar Glen issued notices. Douglas arranged removal. Westbrook charged towing and daily storage. Owners either paid or gave up. What happened to equipment nobody recovered? I asked Bennett. We're finding out. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. The investigation had stopped being about my tractor. 3 days later, Bennett met me at the county administration building. She carried a thick folder. We obtained Cedar Glen's towing records voluntarily from the current board's secretary. Current. Rebecca temporarily stepped aside after the board learned about the investigation. That surprised me less than it should have. Bennett opened the folder. 23 equipment removals in 30 months. Westbrook handled 19. Douglas personally approved 15. My tractor was the only removal involving property completely outside Cedar Glen. That helps explain why he needed the boundary to look uncertain, I said. Bennett nodded. Then she showed me an invoice. Westbrook had billed Cedar Glen a reduced administrative rate. Beside it was another document. A payment ledger. Several entries referenced something called consulting referral. The recipient wasn't Cedar Glen. It was DH Property Services. Douglas Halstead? I asked. Registered at his home address. The room felt suddenly smaller. How much? We're still calculating. I looked through the glass doors toward the parking lot. The orange survey stake flashed in my memory. Douglas shining his light onto it. Stepping over it. Walking directly toward my tractor. He hadn't misunderstood the line. He had needed to ignore it. Bennett turned another page. Westbrook's manager says Douglas told him Cedar Glen had authority over your access road. It doesn't. We know. He had my survey. We know that too. Those 2 words mattered. We know. Not suspect. Not assume. No. Bennett had the deed. Recorded plat. Certified survey. Camera footage. Tow authorization. And Douglas's own communications with Westbrook. There's one more thing, she said. She placed a photograph on the table. Rows of equipment sat behind a chain-link fence at Westbrook's storage yard. Trailers. Mowers. Generators. Attachments. Near the back, unmistakable even beneath gray morning light, was my tractor. Still there. For now. Can I recover it? Not yet. We're preserving evidence. I nodded. As much as I wanted the machine home, I understood. Then Bennett pointed toward something beside it. A blue utility trailer. Raymond Foster's name was still faintly visible on the frame. He paid to recover that, I said. According to him, yes. Then why is it there? Bennett closed the folder. That's exactly what we're going to ask. The badge had made Douglas freeze. But one frightened expression wasn't justice. Justice was what happened next, when one stolen tractor opened the gate to a storage yard full of questions. The storage yard didn't look like the center of a scheme. It looked like a graveyard for things people had stopped fighting to get back. 2 weeks after my tractor disappeared, Detective Bennett called me shortly after sunrise. We served warrants this morning. Westbrook, and 2 related locations. I sat down at my kitchen table. What did you find? Enough that this isn't just about your tractor anymore. She couldn't give me every detail while the investigation was active, but over the following days, the shape became clearer. Investigators documented equipment matching several previous Cedar Glen complaints. Some items had supposedly been released to owners. Others had accumulated storage charges until recovery cost more than the property itself. Financial records created an uglier picture. DH Property Services had received repeated payments connected to Westbrook referrals. Douglas called them consulting fees. Investigators wanted to know what consulting had actually occurred. Then they recovered emails. One message from Douglas to Westbrook discussed my tractor before the final HOA notice had even expired. Another identified the model and approximate value. But the message Bennett eventually showed me was only one sentence long. Caldwell is outside the boundary, but he'll fold once the machine is gone. I read it twice. There it was. No misunderstanding. No misplaced survey marker. No reasonable belief that Cedar Glen controlled my property. Douglas knew. The orange stake he'd examined under a flashlight wasn't evidence of confusion. It was evidence he'd checked the line before ignoring it. What about Rebecca? I asked. Bennett closed the folder. We're following the documents. That was the right answer. A week later, Cedar Glen's board turned over internal emails and financial records. Rebecca had approved multiple enforcement referrals to Westbrook. Several involved equipment removals. Investigators also found messages where she discussed using towing and storage costs to pressure resistant homeowners into compliance. Whether every decision was criminal wasn't mine to determine. But the pattern was no longer something she could dismiss as neighborhood management. Raymond Foster was interviewed again. So were 6 other residents. Westbrook's manager began cooperating through an attorney. Douglas did the same after investigators confronted him with the email, the survey, my footage, and the referral payments. The story he'd told that first morning, that he was simply enforcing HOA rules, couldn't survive his own records. Charges followed. Douglas faced allegations tied to the unlawful removal of my tractor, deceptive documentation, and the financial arrangements surrounding prior tows. Additional allegations depended on individual transactions and what investigators could prove. Rebecca resigned as HOA president before the board could vote on removing her. Her attorney issued a statement saying she disputed wrongdoing. I didn't celebrate. I'd learned years earlier that an arrest wasn't a conviction and an allegation wasn't proof. The evidence still had to survive the process. Then Bennett called. Your tractor has been released. I drove to Westbrook that afternoon. The chain-link gate rolled open with a metallic groan. My tractor sat near the back exactly where I'd seen it in the photograph. Mud dried across the rear tires. A towing tag hung from the steering column. I climbed into the seat. The familiar smell of diesel, vinyl, and dust hit me harder than I expected. Before starting it, I looked toward the faded blue utility trailer parked 2 rows away. Raymond's. Investigators had finally explained why it was there. Records claiming it had been released were false. Raymond hadn't imagined what happened. Neither had the others. I turned the key. The engine caught with a deep, familiar rumble. Douglas had believed taking one machine would teach me who controlled Cedar Glen. Instead, that tractor had led investigators straight through the gate he never expected anyone to open. And now I was driving it home while his own paperwork stayed behind as evidence. 6 months after Douglas watched my badge open beneath the morning light, I parked the tractor exactly 1 inch inside my property line. Not 2 feet. Not 20. 1 inch. The orange survey stake stood beside the front tire, bright against the winter-brown grass. I shut off the engine. The diesel rumble faded into silence. For the first time in months, Cedar Glen felt quiet. A lot had happened since I drove the tractor out of Westbrook's storage yard. Douglas eventually entered a plea agreement after prosecutors reviewed the towing records, financial payments, emails, camera footage, and statements from multiple property owners. He admitted his role in arranging unauthorized removals and receiving payments connected to referrals. Other allegations were resolved as part of that agreement. Rebecca's case followed a different path. Investigators could prove she had approved aggressive enforcement practices and participated in several questionable referrals, but they treated each allegation according to the evidence supporting it. She resigned from the board permanently. Cedar Glen hired outside counsel and ordered an independent review of its enforcement history. That review changed things. 23 removals were examined. Homeowners who had paid disputed towing or storage charges were notified about reimbursement claims. Several pieces of equipment still sitting at Westbrook were returned after ownership was verified. Raymond Foster got his blue utility trailer back. He called me the afternoon it arrived. Still has my name on it, he said. Good. You know what's funny? What? They washed it. I laughed harder than I expected. The Cedar Glen board changed too. New rules required documented jurisdiction before any property-related enforcement action. No board member's spouse could direct contractors. Towing decisions required written review. And property boundaries had to come from recorded plats or certified surveys, not landscaping diagrams with yellow marker drawn across somebody else's land. My own tractor came home with minor scratches and a bent step. Insurance handled the repairs. I kept the towing tag, not because I needed a souvenir, because sometimes an ordinary piece of paper reminds you how easily official-looking language can intimidate people who assume someone else must know the rules better than they do. One Saturday afternoon, I was replacing a hydraulic hose when Raymond stopped by. He looked toward Cedar Glen. Everybody says Douglas picked the wrong guy. I tightened the fitting. What does that mean? You being a detective? I wiped my hands. He didn't pick the wrong guy. Raymond frowned. He stole from a cop. He took property that wasn't his. That would have been wrong if I sold tires for a living. Raymond considered that. Then he nodded. That distinction mattered to me. The badge had created the moment Douglas would probably remember forever. His face when he saw it. The silence. The sudden realization that the man he dismissed understood exactly how evidence worked. But the badge wasn't what brought the tractor home. The deed did. The serial number did. The survey did. The camera footage did. Witnesses did. Records did. And investigators who weren't personally involved followed those facts where they led. At sunset, I climbed onto the tractor one last time and moved it beside the barn. The orange stake remained behind me. I could have parked farther away. I didn't. The front tire stopped 1 inch inside the surveyed line. My land. My machine. My decision. I removed the key and felt its worn metal against my palm. Douglas had believed authority was whatever he could print on HOA letterhead. Rebecca believed repeating a rule loudly enough could stretch it across a boundary. They were both wrong. Real authority has limits. Real ownership has records. And justice doesn't become stronger because the person demanding it carries a badge. Douglas froze when he saw mine. But by then, the most important evidence had already been recorded. Justice wasn't loud. It was documented, patient, and waiting exactly where they'd crossed the line.